I crawled through what was initially a very dark tunnel. I would even say it was an earthy darkness. It was so difficult. It was very arduous.
You really crawled?
Yes, I couldn't move any further.
There are many people who perceive nature spirits or elemental beings and say that the origin of what we know today from fairy tales, sagas and legends is actually a real experience. You've just said that it was similar for you.
That was truly a profound experience when the Dwarf King actually approached me when I went to see him.
Miss Zeller, you're a kindergarten teacher and author, and you describe yourself as a dwarf ambassador. I would like to discuss in more detail your approach to non-material, or perhaps in this case, fairy tale-like realities in a moment. But first, I would like to ask you to tell me about those experiences that gave you access to these unusual, or, as you put it, multisensory realms of perception, or that facilitated this access. You have had near-death experiences in your life, the first at the age of 5. To begin with, could you tell me what happened back then? What do you remember?
Yes, with pleasure. At the time, I was going to Graz with my parents and suddenly had a croup episode in my grandmother's apartment, accompanied with shortness of breath. I remember lying on my grandmother's bed, the blue blanket. I can see it all. I then left my body relatively quickly and observed all these events from a bird's-eye view. The doctor arrived with a black suitcase. I felt the hectic activity, the emotions, the fears. It was a situation that caused enormous stress for everyone. The whole thing was resolved after I received a penicillin injection. That was standard practice back then and the treatment of choice. Shortly after that, I returned to my body.
So you never lost consciousness, so to speak?
No, not during this experience.
Was it unusual for you to suddenly be out of your body? You experienced that as a child.
I experienced this as a child. I should preface this by saying that shortly before this happened, I was abused by my piano teacher during my piano lessons. Unfortunately, that's how it happened. I believe that this flowing out of the body might also be related to that.
Perhaps the croup attacks had something to do with it too.
Yes, exactly.
So it was a place of escape being outside the body.
Absolutely. I also know that I often left my body during these piano lessons to escape the whole thing. This near-death experience, triggered by a physical reaction, I had never experienced anything so intense before.
It was an out-of-body experience. You also experienced the emotions of other people, the hecticness of the situation. Were there any other special experiences connected with that? Any particular sensations? Or was that essentially what you experienced, being out of your body?
That was the main sensation, being out of your body. But perception is very broad in such a situation. I could see very far. Not just the room, although that was the area of focus, of course. But when I look back, it's as if there were no walls. You rise above matter and can gaze into the distance. That's the best way I can describe it.
Were you able to talk to anyone about this experience, your parents or friends? Or were you completely alone in processing it?
No, I certainly didn't talk about it. I also didn't talk to anyone about the experiences that preceded it. Perhaps that's why, to this day, this near-death experience has never been discussed with anyone. Not even with members of my family.
Did you feel a need to talk about it?
I don't think it was important to me. Not at all. I know it had a profound impact on me and changed me. Just as you rightly said, this refuge remains. Death, or approaching death, is nothing to be afraid of, but rather a very pleasant sensation, one imbued with lightness.
Did these assaults during your piano lessons come to an end, hopefully?
No, unfortunately not. They didn't end. It all ended when I dropped out of music school and didn't have to go anymore. It lingered for a while, though.
Looking back on your childhood and adolescence, to what extent do you think these out-of-body experiences shaped your early life? How did they change you, make you more sensitive? How would you assess this in retrospect?
They certainly changed me, that much is certain. Also the fact that I felt closer to creation than to humanity. I withdrew a great deal into myself, into my own experience. I remember enjoying insects. I once watched a caterpillar eating a leaf. That fascinated me for years. Those were essential observations of nature which I relied on and drew strength from. But even this broader perspective stayed with me after the experience. I remember imagining I could hear the planets singing. And as a child, when you can't talk to anyone about it, at some point I dismissed it and said it was all nonsense. As a child, all you want is to belong to a community or to feel supported by it. I think I completely blocked it all out at one point. I wanted nothing to do with it, and...
You have conformed.
Conformed, exactly.
Then, at the age of 31, as an adult, you had another near-death experience that was profoundly formative. What happened back then?
Yes. This near-death experience was foreshadowed. I'd like to put it that way. I confided in a trusted person at the time, my aunt, and told her about my impending death. Even though I was a single mother of a young daughter, it didn't worry me. That was one of the strangest things about the whole story. But I knew with certainty that this would happen.
You thought you were going to die?
Yes, exactly. I had a premonition. Then after a sauna visit, I collapsed and ended up in the emergency room. The next day, they told me how close I had come to death. All sorts of tests were done, but nothing was found. Nothing came of it, except that I had lost my sense of taste and smell. That was gone. From then on, everything was truly different.
Do you use the term near-death experience to describe this real proximity to death that you physically experienced because you were in an exceptional physical state? Or did you also have special experiences, out-of-body experiences again, or other experiences?
Yes, I had other experiences. I crawled through what was initially a very dark tunnel. I would even say it was an earthy darkness. It was so difficult. It was very arduous.
You were really crawling?
Yes, I couldn't move any further. It felt like I weighed 100 tons. I know I was crawling over roots. The further I went, the easier it became. Suddenly, in the darkness, I saw ornaments like those Indian fabrics you can find at market stalls, tunnels draped with ornaments, or this one tunnel in particular. And then it was very, very easy. I went through it very easily. That heaviness was gone too. And I then entered a very bright light.
Were you still crawling?
No. This happened without any matter. That was without the physical body.
But you had the feeling of moving.
Yes, I moved. I was drawn to the light. It awakened in me a deep longing to get even closer to it.
So you saw light in the distance?
Yes, truly a beautiful light.
And you moved towards it?
Yes, exactly. But then a being stood there and gestured to me with a finger movement that I was not allowed entry. There was no sound, but the signal made it very clear to me that I could, or rather had to, turn back.
You didn't want to?
I didn't want to, no.
Was that a feeling of home?
Yes. And that continued even after I was back in my body. This cosmic homesickness, I'll just call it that. I felt it so intensely. I could feel it for a very, very long time. It was as if upon returning back in my body, back on Earth, I wasn't really at home. I had that feeling very strongly.
What was the return like? Was it difficult?
The return was actually very quick and rather abrupt. Whoosh, I was back. Intensive care unit, bright lights, bright lamps. I think that was the moment I opened my eyes again.
Could you tell us a little more about this encounter? Was this being of light the only being you met? Or did you feel there was more and you weren't allowed to go there? Were there any other feelings associated with it that you can describe?
I know this light being very well by now, even by name. It has been my constant companion since that moment. I have also been fortunate enough to get to know many other light beings, also by name.
Later?
Later, yes. But they seem to have been summoned by this, I call it an angel. I sometimes see it like a gathering, a conference. It's always in a very specific area, one I never felt connected to before. But since that near-death experience, the Himalayan mountains have become my home. My longing to return there, or even just to visit, remains strong and unbroken. I feel very, very comfortable there. Later, during a meditation that came to me seemingly out of nowhere, later on, this often happened, I would slip from my waking consciousness into meditative states. And one day, I was in that realm and saw that a place was being assigned to me. I know this place well, and that has remained the case to this day.
You've already hinted at it a bit, but how did this near-death experience, which you probably remember even more vividly than the one from your childhood, change you? You had a hard time coping with it. What happened next?
It was truly an absolute catastrophe. The worst part was when my daughter told me, "You're not my mom anymore." Since I was her closest caregiver, she felt it very strongly.
Were you able to explain that to her a little?
Yes. we grew much closer as a result. My entire lifestyle changed from that day on, and the child naturally sensed that too. From my diet to my whole awareness, everything changed so drastically. And my whole outlook on life, on interpersonal relationships with all sorts of people, including at work, changed so fundamentally. And I think there was definitely a time when people didn't want anything to do with me at all. That was really, really difficult for me, because I also knew that I was going through a real separation. At times, I really did wonder, am I okay? What's wrong with me? Of course, you also reach a point where you ask yourself, what is reality? Where is the illusion? Where does it begin and where does it end? Where is the deception? So many, many questions. You question yourself, you question everything, including what happened. I definitely did that.
Since you just mentioned reality, many people who have had near-death experiences struggle with similar problems, especially because they say, as you also have said, what I experienced in that state is the actual reality.
Exactly.
In contrast, physical life is like a dream, and that's why it's so difficult to connect with it. This is called hyperreality. Did you experience it that way too?
Yes, definitely. And not only that, it's so widespread. What you said at the beginning, multisensory perception, I can't describe it in any other way. I could suddenly talk to animals. I found animals everywhere that needed me. It's truly unimaginable, even wild animals.
In everyday life?
In everyday life, exactly. Communication with the animals suddenly appeared. People came and said, "Help me," and I held out my hand to them, and so much happened. So many amazing things happened that I couldn't understand back then. Sometimes I didn't even know where all these people came from. Truly, a completely different life began. I also had the feeling that perhaps I had gained an additional soul aspect, a kind of walk-in process, where maybe a more conscious soul also found its way into my soul spectrum. I often had that feeling. From that point on, my eye color started to change. It started back then that my eye color changed from green to blue. Of course, I noticed it too. It's not exactly an everyday occurrence. I was then able to connect that to contacts with certain beings I got to know better and better.
Ultimately, were you able to reconcile everyday life with these experiences?
Yes, I was. It was, I really have to say, an enormous challenge. Also professionally, I faced enormous obstacles. But then I threw myself into work. My daughter grew older, and I took on a second job, working 80 hours a week. I think that was my therapy. In my limited free time, I would often go for walks, trying to reflect on everything. I found it easier to do so in nature. That's when the next thing happened. This angel guided me to prepare certain substances, ingredients in bottles, and I didn't want to do that at all. But in the end, there were 42 bottles.
All from plants that you picked yourself in nature?
Plants, stones, exactly. We might call them stock bottles. Then he also told me to go to my new place of residence, to go where the Archangel Michael is. I had no idea. I put little Katharina in the car and we drove off. There's a really large image at the entrance of the church in Fronsdorf, a truly enormous depiction of the Archangel Michael. I then went to the community hall and asked for an apartment. I've been living there ever since. I was able to settle in very quickly.
So you changed your place of residence.
Yes, I changed my place of residence, and that's when it happened, that around Easter time, many light beings came again and guided me in creating the essence of revelation.
What are essences of revelation?
In a kind of trance, I strained these essences into bottles and decanted them and labeled them. Texts were sent to me, page after page. 3 sentences were written for the physical body, the emotional body, and the spiritual body, described in detail, including their effects and how they can be used. On the day of this revelation, I was quite overwhelmed, partly because it came as such a surprise. After going to sleep, I saw the next day everything that was written on the bottles.
All the essences that you had collected?
The descriptions of what they were effective against.
I see in these descriptions.
In these descriptions, exactly.
Did you prepare for it in any way, or did it all happen completely spontaneously?
It all happened completely spontaneously. That kept happening to me after that profound near-death experience. Sometimes, even when I'm around people, I get these brief flashes of insights like seeing bodies through an X-ray. The peristalsis, the fluids flowing through the body, these are just fleeting glimpses. At first, I couldn't handle it at all. Today, I know how to distract myself. Today, I know how to switch it off, so to speak. I couldn't do that initially after that near-death experience.
Can you turn it on, or does it always happen spontaneously?
Yes, I can turn it on. That works.
You also told me a little bit beforehand about growing up in a socially respected family. Parents, teachers, major, district school inspector. To what extent was your upbringing, independent of what you experienced as a 5-year-old, religiously or spiritually influenced?
My upbringing wasn't very religious, if at all. But there was my grandmother who took on that role, so to speak, and with whom I was allowed to spend a lot of time. I'm very grateful for that. I believe that we were always very close on a soul level. She was also very receptive to me. For example, as a small child, I was always whining and wanted to bandage Jesus' wounds. My grandmother did that with me.
So this connection to Jesus, to angelic beings, light beings in that sense, this childlike connection was already there.
That was already there, yes.
You speak of an opening up of consciousness that you experienced. You've already mentioned a little bit about it. This also affected an area that is very rarely reported in near-death experiences. How did you experience this opening up? How did the contact with the Dwarf King come about?
Beforehand, I saw nature in its entirety. It wasn't just the tree anymore, but the tree with the fawn, with the tree spirit, and many other things as well. I wasn't seeking an encounter with the Dwarf King. I was simply hiking the same trail over and over again on weekends during this busy work period. And there he was one day, standing under the tall fir trees, looking at me. I definitely ignored him for 5 years, because I just wanted peace and quiet. I wanted to clear my head. It wasn't until someone told me about the legends and fairy tales from this area that I started to look into it. Then I realized there were parallels, and that this Dwarf King is a being already mentioned in ancient literature. That's when it became interesting to me, and then I sought him out.
To put this out there for the audience, there are many people who perceive nature spirits or elemental beings and say that the origin of what we know today from fairy tales and legends is actually a real experience. You've just mentioned that your initial perception of nature was quite similar. How did you experience nature? Did it gradually expand and deepen? Did you see more and more of these beings, or were they always there? Could you describe this development a little?
Yes, gladly. For example, when I saw a stream or a spring, I could trace it with my inner eye all the way to the guardian of the spring. It even happened that people called me when there were problems. And the moment I raised the guardian of the spring, things started working again.
What kind of problems?
Like the water drying up, for example, or that something is wrong with the supply line, or things like that. Every body of water, every spring has a guardian, and it's the same with trees. Every tree, as I've already said, has a faun, which is, so to speak, the tree spirit. Even meadows. I would often lie down in a meadow and look at the flowers, or take in the scent, really trying to absorb all of nature through my senses as a source of strength. Sometimes I even saw a fairy or an elf, but it was never like with the Dwarf king, where I communicated. Not at all. It wouldn't have occurred to me.
And that's when the actual communication started. How did that develop?
It was a truly profound experience for me with the Dwarf king. When I went to see him, he approached me and even shook my hand. I could actually feel him physically. I know that sounds really strange, but it's true. He then started rhyming to me, and these rhymes were initially just completely disorganized. I couldn't make heads or tails of his texts and rhymes until he gave me a stone as a kind of medium.
That's when something meaningful came out of the rhymes.
I was able to receive it much better. They are rhymes that have been written down for a long time. This is ancient knowledge that is also new knowledge. It is meant to lead us humans back to a greater connection with nature, and also to those concepts concerning the inner earth, elemental beings, and so on. Even the wisdom teachers, Paracelsus and others, dealt with these nature beings. I was able to experience this firsthand, and that has remained true to this day. They do possess, especially the dwarfs in my case, a very enormous power and a diverse range of influence.
Can this be summarized somehow? It's certainly a huge topic right now. What, in your view, is the role of nature spirits? And what would be the ideal in communication between humans and nature spirits?
The nature spirits are governed by one element. That's certainly one big difference between them and us humans. We humans have all the elements within us, and the dwarves, who are at home in the element of earth, are completely immersed in this earth element. They want to serve the greater mother, the soul of our Mother Earth. They want to clean the rocks and so on, but stay in their element. It's the same with the elemental beings of the various elements, just like the fairies and elves who want to pass on their herbal knowledge to humans, as they have done in the past.
So, the knowledge of what to do with which plant and how.
Exactly. That's what I mean by this ancient knowledge, this herbal knowledge. I believe that nature spirits want to remind humanity to focus on what is essential, on the essence within themselves, away from turbo-capitalism and the vast material world we inhabit. And to look again at the small things that are actually the greatest.
To what extent do you believe that our behavior, you mentioned turbo-capitalism, but also our materialistic mindset in general, which is accompanied by significant environmental destruction, to what extent does this, in your view, influence the world of nature spirits? Are there interactions or are they protected within their element?
Yes, of course. There are interactions. There are also areas that have been abandoned by nature spirits, or rather are being abandoned because they no longer wish or are able to confront themselves with it. Whatever the reason, where truly barren nature is left behind.
How would you describe the role of nature spirits? Do they oversee life processes? Or what happens when a region is abandoned by nature spirits? Does it then seem particularly lifeless, or how do you experience it?
I do believe that these are very lifeless regions. I can best describe it from the perspective of the dwarves, because I've gained a very deep insight into their world. Above all, the dwarves want to bring the connection to the earth closer to humanity again.
You also wrote about this in a book. You self-published a very detailed, beautifully designed book with texts, pictures and poems in 2024. The title is The Call of the Dwarf King, High Alpine Secrets, Volume 2. What's it all about?
The Dwarf King wants to impart to humanity the knowledge of the inner earth, namely, that the earth is alive, that there are beings there, and that even the dwarves themselves are guided by the archangels and angels, and that they act under their guidance, and so to speak, carry out their activities and work. And he wants to give humanity back the ancient knowledge that these fairy tale figures you mentioned at the beginning do indeed exist in the inner earth and are at home there.
You haven't just written this one book, but several. How did you get into writing in the first place? Was there a specific trigger that made you say, now I want to be an author, now I'm going to write something? Did something compel you?
Well, after my second near-death experience, I started writing about nature spirits. I wrote lyrical poems about Aquarius or other beings. It gradually developed from there, but I never sought to channel a dwarf or anything like that, if that's what you mean. I simply wrote down the experiences authentically and set them to rhyme.
I wish you much success with your writing. Thank you so much for your openness in sharing so much of your personal story. I wish you continued success and thank you for the conversation.
Thank you as well for allowing me to be here. Thank you.